So I'm going to introduce myself. I'm Professor John Holley from the Sociology Department, giving a talk today. This talk is sponsored by the Department of Sociology at Suffolk University. And my talk today is Sociology's winning trifecta: people, objects, and society. So I'm talking today something that's a sociological topic that matters to me a lot. And that's because I work in this area, because I teach in this area, and it also keeps me personally excited. So I'm going to say, first of all, a summary of what my argument is. So the thing that I'm really saying is that society gives people guidance when they use popular culture objects. So this talk is about the objects and the people and society. What's important, though, particularly, are these objects. What these objects can tell us, I'm trying to say, is that they can tell us where we are, where we're located in time and in place. Next, they can tell us which actions are better. In a sense, they give us some way of evaluating what's better and what's not so good. They give us judgments. And finally, they will tell us how other people feel about us. And this is important sociologically because it relates a person to the other people in society. It connects us back and forth. And this all is happening, I'm going to argue, through objects, particularly, specifically, objects in popular culture. So, what is a social object? So, in this case, I mean, an object is not just a thing like a floor or walls, but socially designed objects which are designed to communicate. So, objects enable other people to relate to us. So, I give an example here of Santa. Santa is an object. It seems like it could be a person, but it's not really a person. It's an image. It's it's an object of communication, which, just to summarize this quickly, will tell us, when we associate with Santa objects, other people relate to us. A grown-up does to a child. So I'm trying to understand, I'm theorizing objects as being mediators between people. So a child object like Santa mediates between the adult and the child by associating the childness of the person who is using the Santa objects and the grown-upness of the person who is creating the Santa, connecting through Santa, if we'll see what I'm saying by that. So I'm trying to say Santa is actually the paradigm of all modern social objects, that it's designed, it has a message, things like that, and it's connecting between people. So, next thing, where do we find social objects? Society is full of thousands of signifying objects. So I'm saying popular culture is everywhere, it's all around us. These objects are ubiquitous in modern society, there's plenty of them. What's important about them is that these objects fill up the space around us so that modern people aren't alone. So there are some images of society which say that without personal relationships or without some defining institutional connections, people are sort of isolated. But I don't think that's the way modern society works. What I'm really saying is these objects, because they're all around us, are connecting people all the time, all over the place, and that's what makes it fascinating from a sociological point of view. How objects are useful. I'm presenting a picture of American society that's filled with objects. That these objects are going to guide people and harmonize the connections between them. So, in order for this to happen, I'm also claiming that people know how to use these objects and use them to steer their lives. So I'm saying something very sociological here. What I'm saying is that these objects are important ways of connecting people together, harmonizing them, guiding them, and using ways people can relate to each other through them. Okay, next thing I want to say. This isn't the conventional picture of society that we've got. This is something new. Social scientists before haven't regarded society as successfully guided by its objects. They've seen other ways in which society is connected, particularly past societies, which I would regard as a more historical ways of connecting, but what's distinctively modern has been kind of missing. Creating a new picture of society is the project of the social theorist. So the social theorist is someone whose job it is to look at new societies and think about them in a new way, and think particularly about modern American society and think about how it's connected together. Next thing I'm going to say is that I am a theorist. I'm in sociology. And so that the picture that I'm presenting of modern society comes out of the work of the professional social theorist. That is, it's the job of the theorist to look at society and imagine it in new ways. What does the theorist do? Okay, the job of the theorist, I'm saying, is to give the big picture view. All right, so when we're theorizing something big like society, we're trying to say, let's not, let's say that's not here, let's not count all the details. There's going to be bits and pieces of them which we can't discuss, but what we are trying to figure out is a big picture overview of what society's like. And then the next thing, the theorist tries to provide an internally consistent model that describes a great many important events. So it's not, even scientists don't claim that theories understand and explain everything. The social science can't either. There are lots of practical, detailed things that are not explained by it. But does it explain important events? That's the only other. Does it really explain things that are significant? And is it internally consistent? By which I mean, do the different pieces of the model fit together so they're not just lumps of things thrown in separately, but they're connected somehow? That seems to be the challenge of a theorist. So what I'm saying is, can we provide a picture, a big picture of modern American society? Looking at it overall, do objects help us make that picture? Why might this picture involve popular culture objects? So that's what I'm going to say with that. Next, I'm going to identify what I regard as wrong ways of looking at society. So I've seen many unconvincing pictures. I will call those more strictly speaking, I'll call those theoretical models. Some of them which I've found, and I don't find them convincing, is that they, number one, say seeing society politically. So if we look at society politically, that is, if we see it as laws and public administration, we'd see society as organized institutionally. That is, we would say the most important features in society are institutions, perhaps government, perhaps the system of rules of law, and then, oops, what am I doing? Oh, I've got something in there. Oh, something's popped up on my computer. Apple wants to intrusively update my thing. Get rid of that. So, looking at society institutionally would see the things like the Constitution and the law and political organizations as being the way in which society is organized. But we couldn't see that. I'm not convinced by that it relates to people in the relationships. It doesn't relate, for example, parents and children, the quality of it, or why we have Santa. Those kind of things don't come up politically as law. They seem to be something else, which I'm going to describe as basically sociological. Next one, a way of seeing society, which I'm not convinced explains the big picture, is to seeing society economically. Seeing it as cash, seeing it as money, seeing it as people employing what we're buying things. Clearly the economy is important in society, but it's not, I would say, even as an idea of capitalism, explaining relationships between people and some of the other things which I'm going to argue are important features of what's distinctively modern in modern life. And the third one, which I'm also not going to say is convincing, is seeing society biologically. That is, seeing all human interaction as basically human brain areas and hardwiring. So if you were to talk to psychologists, if you were to talk to the medical people at the moment, they're often describing just its parts of the brain, this, whatever the front brain, middle brain, back brain, hypothalamus, or whatever, all these areas, and that all human behavior can basically be described by which parts of the brain are firing. It's popular at the moment, but it doesn't persuade me that they are sociologically explaining what the connections are between people. So because I see them sociologically deficient, I'm going to argue that American society is sociological. But what I mean by this is that modern American society contains features that are distinctively sociological. That is, that they're not explained by the politics or the economics or the brain chemistry or neurons in the brain. Number one, free choices. So many people take varied paths. Because there's a lot of choice, people are making decisions which are moving them in different lifestyles, different choices, and that those things can't be explained by them just having the same evolutionary brain, or economics, which is sort of blind to whether I buy apples or oranges, or I buy vacations, or I buy education. That's just counted as money, and I don't see political institutions guiding all those choices. Second, I think it's sociological because much of American society is spontaneous and full of informal groups, which I would call non-structural. That is, that any kind of fan grouping, any kind of associations that people have together happen spontaneously. Social networks, new media, any of those kind of things are not structurally existing for a long time. They're things which pop up for groups of people. They pop into existence and then they disappear as people move on to something else. So they're short-lived. So the next thing about it, which is rapidly disappearing, that they have ephemerality, that many of the associations that connect people together don't last that long, but while they do, they're important, but they don't leave a trace behind when they've gone. I mean, they leave other kinds of, they don't leave an institutional form when they're gone, so they're not structural. And finally, people express themselves through these designed objects, which I'm going to say is a communication through objects and not really through culture. If we take the idea of culture as being something fixed, something enduring, something that's a long time, then we're not going to see culture in the form of why people are fans of a particular star at the moment, or why they're wearing a particular fashion style, and why it's going to disappear a few years from now and people will be doing something different. That's not, they're the same people, they're living in the same, apparently the same America, but it's not a fixed culture which is guiding them. It seems to be objects. That's what I'm going to argue here. So, what a model of society should explain, I think, is why people behave so differently in stages of life. So one of the things that I'm trying to understand is, over the course of lifetimes, people behave in different ways. Early childhood, much of it is about fantasy, it's about play, for example. It's not about, it's imaginative games. It's not even realistic. I mean, there are shows about people who have imaginary friends. How do we have a society where people are encouraged at a certain age to even imagine to have friends that they don't exist? So, teen years. Being a teen means being very group connected, which is something different again from tumultuous 20s, which are called there. People in their 20s when they're single, when they're trying to find their own lives, find themselves, become more realistic, taking a much longer time than previous societies to do that. Again, think of the enormous responsibilities that come with parenting. When people are in that parenting phase, they're thinking about children, thinking about others, thinking about themselves as givers to their children in a way that's very different from the earlier stages of life. So using a life course perspective there, in which we're saying people do have remarkably different lives in different years, is to say people are changing themselves in a way which isn't legal. And it's not really institutional. It's certainly not economic, although obviously these factors connect into it some ways. And it doesn't seem to me that it can be biological. If you have the same brain, it seems to me stretching beyond credibility to believe that the child brain is so different from the teen brain, which is different from the 20s brain, which is different from the parenting brain. I don't believe that human biological evolution from earlier animals. The biologists talked to us about the lizard brain. I don't know if you've heard of it, which is that we're all developed from the dinosaurs, and that we have a lizard brain with a forebrain, a middle brain, and a back brain, and it's been there since those times. I don't think that can explain phases of life and how we change for modern American people. Next thing I want to try and explain, generational differences. Why do the decades in the United States look so different? Each generation seems to be giving it its own stamp. We seem to have different political ideas, different social causes, different stars, different aesthetics, even maybe different dreams. And yet they stamped onto these as separate decades of the United States. So life in the United States looks different in different decades. And that seems to be something which we could explain sociologically, not in any other way. Third, why our most meaningful relationships are with strangers. So the next thing is we're encouraged in our society to form our deepest connections with people who are not kin to us and who are not known to us. So even our friends, for example, most people are encouraged to make their own school friends through school, not just to play, as other societies might be encouraged to play with their brothers and sisters, to play with cousins and people who are some kind of kin to us. We're encouraged to make our own friends. Making those strangers, getting ourselves back into the frame of mind where we can understand what it was like on our first day in school. Trying to make friends, discovering people who have difficulty making friends, all those sort of things indicate how important it is to translate strangers into people who have a close relationship with us. And yet, we know from people's description of their own lives how important best friends are. That finding a best friend, staying close to friends is very important to people. And not to everybody, but finding good friends is important. Next, out marrying. That's another area in which we're supposed to marry someone, not who's kin to us, not who's arranged marriage through our parents, but to marrying a stranger. That has been argued to be the main mechanism by which American society has assimilated immigrants, which is marrying up to people who are not part of our group, joining different groups together through marriage. It's quintessentially about strangers. Next thing, startup associations. Many of the enterprises, businesses, organizations which we've joined are not connected together just because we're paying for them economically, or because we knew about them in the past, or even because they exist in the past. But starting new organizations, starting new campaigns, means effectively connecting with strangers. So all these ways I would say summarize this as saying sociology is going to explain things that are not biological about people, and not political, and maybe not economic either. All right, so model society matters because it gives us the big picture. So we can explain in a more connected way that is going in America. We're also going to be able to, I think, explain people's success and failure. These are some big picture ideas of what we might be able to do if we can have a sociological theory. And who's in the driver's seat steering society's changes? That is, what kinds of action is making these changes between decades? And what future direction we can expect society to take. Those seem to be important, interesting questions that might be opened up by looking at it sociologically. So how are objects going to put the pieces of life together? So I'm going to say next thing, objects explain time. They're going to explain time as our personal biography, that they're going to locate us in time by our personal phases of life, and I do broadly 6 of those, but you could, however you want to divide up the life course, whether it's early childhood, mid-childhood, teens, dating, living independently by getting your own house and careers, parenting, post-parenting. Those to me would be the big 6 phases of life. That objects are going to supply judgments. They're going to, I mentioned this before, but they're going to supply the attractiveness of things and show us what's good and bad. Objects are also going to contain dreams. They contain ideal worlds that are designed into them. That is, they're going to give us images of things that we would want, just as the magic of Santa gives us an image of what Christmas could be, is have a world in which we get presents, which we get things given to us that are new and shiny and exciting. These things are going to be contained in the dreams of objects that we use, whether it's a music that speaks to us, or a movie or something that defines our generation. These are big ways in which we're getting a dream inside them. And these objects add up to organize people into generations, which is the next thing I'm going to talk about quite a bit, is that how these aggregate into whole generational groups. So, now, I'm going to look at some examples of different objects. We've talked in general about them, let's give some examples. What social objects can do for us? That's the theme of this particular section. Okay, so this one, I think I have to run over here. This. Get into this one I will have to do as part of, yeah, we can see that. Okay, so this one is a website called BuzzFeed, which is using objects. So the particular one is that we're looking at here, can we guess your actual age? And that one is asking us to say, it's setting itself up algorithmically, right, to say, we can know what your age is by looking, not just what's your age, but as we're going to see, we can find out information about you just by asking you to pick some objects. So these objects, it says, are going to tell you what a person is, only in terms by age, but because they're social objects, it's going to locate you in time. Certainly, that's what I'm trying to demonstrate here, that these things will pick you. So the first one says pick a drink. So this one is saying we can pick ages of people by, I can't show them all on this screen, but it's telling you asking you what your favorite drink is. Because drinks are also an object that is social and comes along in fashion, we can say which one of these is drink of choice. They'll define you by time. We could have done it, I suppose. Pick a gym class. Not all of these are objects, by the way, but I think, with the ones it's surprisingly, it's interesting revealing how many of them actually are objects. Oh, oops, sorry. I don't know. Some of this, I think, is British. I think that these are but yoga, spinning class, Pilates. I don't know what if rave is a type trampolining, zumba, ballet, aqua aerobics. Showing my age that I don't know what all these are. Pick a Lindsay. Again, because these happened in sequential years, and which you knew them, I know the things that used to drive Lindsay apparently over the edge. If any fan would say to her, "Oh, you look so cute in The Parent Trap," because that puts her way back in childhood, right? And then the early movies of that. So our movie stars and what they've been through sequentially is also locating us in terms of time. Next ones that we have, is there something that isn't an object? Pick an emotion. Oh, this one. Yeah, I think this is actually not a social object. This is just asking you to identify. But this is interesting. Can social emotions also be classified by generation? That some are more distinctive of a generation than others? Was there a whole generation of people who were tired or hungry? Moody, that's just teenagers everywhere, isn't it? I don't know. Pick a pet.
Micro pig.
They were little tiny pot-belly pigs. I don't know how micro the pig could be when they bred it small enough. I don't know. But are there pets also for particular ages? Budgie, that's English, but it means a parakeet. This must be British. That's why maybe I relate to it. Pick a piece of slang. Okay. YOLO, which my students had to tell me stands for you. Would you tell me what stands for YOLO?
You only live once.
Yes, thank you. Okay, so this is supposed to be.
It's from a song.
Hmm?
It's from a song.
Oh, it is?
He made it up, yeah. Well, yeah.
Yeah. But it
became famous.
Yeah, but it is apparently famous for people actually saying it, or certainly the tween girls or something, the ones who... Minging? Yeah, it means like whinging or whining or... I don't know, maybe not minging. I don't know, maybe I got it wrong. I think it's British again. I don't know. I don't know what FOMO is either. Does that one?
FOMO is fear of missing out.
Fear of missing out? Oh, thank you.
Condition.
Yeah, I know what fat was. That was like the 1990s or something. I'm tempting this. Anyway, all right. So these are also slang or phrases you could certainly see as identify as being again names. Is it true that names certainly have a generational trends and they pass over time? So these ones will tell you pretty much what. Yeah. Been at Suffolk long enough to see Amy's come and go. Boys' names also, ditto. Naming practices are also time-based, although less so than girls, but some of the names are definitely more popular at particular times. So we're getting those names here. So at this point, at the end of the quiz, they should really know an awful lot about us. This one, they're finally saying lunches. again, fads being focused on particular objects and not available in other generations. From this, they figure they can know all about you. So there it is, that's the end of it. Questions or thoughts? What I hope people have taken away from this is a belief that there are, number one, plenty of objects in our society. And, wait a minute, is that one? Well, that's, yeah, it is. It's moved me on to the next one, which is fine. Oh, I don't mind before. I'll blank it just for a moment. All those objects that we've seen tell us that they are ubiquitous in society, right? There are lots and lots of them, whether it's people, whether it's celebrities, whether it's food, whether it's slang sayings, naming practices. All of these things are objects around us which, associated with people, speak to ourselves and locate us in time. And those things seem to me really useful as an understanding sociologically of how people have placed themselves, how they're oriented together. So next thing, look at this. Objects used by one person create a chain of meaning. So people who've looked at things generally in the general area of textually, you could say, is that each person, when you put things together, you're making like a sentence. It's basically the signs that you're connected by one person are saying a set of things about the person themselves. So I gave an example here from students whom you know from popular culture. We were talking about this one. So if we think of a performer that you like, so if you're a really fan of Aaron Lewis, this is apparently from Boston in about the year 2002, 2003, early 2000s. And this song that you like, that is by the band Stained, and it's called Nutshell, for example, then the kind of person who might be a fan of that, this case that we looked at in popular culture, was a girl who had heavy makeup, and the kind of makeup she had was heavy black eye makeup, and she had a certain goth or alternative style. So how you present yourself, what music you like, what star you're a fan of, fits together in a chain or a sentence, which in fancier semiotic language is called a syntagm, which is like a sentence or chain which connects together the meanings. So in normal usage, we expect the meanings of the objects that you put together to be congruent with each other, to give the same message, right? So that this person is emo or punk, and that they like a punk song, and that they like a punk performer, and that style of music and the performer and the clothing go together to make one particular style. So it means that you can, if you switch something that's wrong in the object, it will jump out to people as clashing in terms of meaning with the other objects that you're using. So the student involved in this case was reporting on it, saying that if people who were listening to that performer and the Stained song but were wearing Abercrombie clothing, that would look fake, because it would look like somebody was not carrying the same meaning clothing style as the music that they were listening to, and it would give a sort of intellectual incongruency, a clash of meaning. So people are speaking about themselves by how they connect together popular culture objects. So in this one, the first bit is objects in a wedding photograph. So in this wedding photograph, I've asked people to think about which objects have been put into it and what those objects are saying, and then to think of them as a syntagm or a chain of meaning and what they're adding up to in that. Okay. So if we're starting out with objects that his bride is wearing a cigarette, smoking a cigarette, for example, and is also pregnant. So those are two objects that would go down there. She has, like flip-flops on her feet. So those would be examples of objects that are associated. If you think they're congruent with your ideal of a wedding, then you are not able to identify what the meaning of these objects are in this thing. But I must say this requires a lot of contextual knowledge of people to understand. So I must say people including students who've looked at this, who've come from other countries, don't have that contextual knowledge and don't think that there's anything, don't make the same associations with this thing. They'll just say, for example, it looks nice, they've got their dog with them, the woman's got flowers in her hair, they look happy, they're in front of their house, so this looks like a nice, happy wedding photograph. And they may not be making the same contextual understandings that majority or mainstream Americans would be when they're bringing those things together. How people use objects over the lifetime. So next thing, parents use objects to tell well-intentioned lies. So the first thing I'm going to say is in our earliest phases of life, parents are using objects not to tell the truth, but to actually downright lie to people. And no bigger lie exists than Santa Claus, which is interesting. So I've said Santa's a socially acceptable lie, but the question is, why was it important to consider to start children off with a lie? I'd say that this is an unanswered sociological question, but it's not even supposed to be this seems to me it can't be culture in the sense of socialization, because if you were trying to socialize somebody, it would be into a belief system. But Santa is such an implausible lie that kids, by the time they're 6, 7, 8 years old or something like that, nobody believes in it anymore. So you wouldn't give children an object that they wouldn't believe in later on if you were trying to raise them into adults by that meaning. What it seems that we're doing is we're raising children to use objects and then grow out of them. So we're deliberately giving children objects which we know they cannot hold on to for many phases in their life, and that they're therefore going to distance themselves from the object and therefore from the provider of the object, which is the parents. So this is an interesting case of why objects are important, and which is the kind of thing that a sociological theorist wants to ask. Next thing, using objects to make a friend. So example I give there is a 10-year-old girl makes a new friend using two words, nice shoes. So in this example that I heard of, a girl is going to a new school, she's 10 years old, she doesn't know anybody there, she goes across the schoolyard, she scans around the people, she finds one person, a girl about her own age, and she just walks over to her and says, nice shoes. And they've connected over those shoes. So the question is, next, it's an economical, efficient, fast way of making connections. How can they connect over shoes? Because she's identifying something, not just the fact that they are shoes and she's not barefoot, but that she's identifying the style of the shoes, and they've found a way of connecting over the similarity of their tastes as distinct from what other people are wearing. Maybe this wouldn't have worked where there's school uniforms, although from what I understand in school uniforms, even then kids manage to find a way of distinguishing themselves by the kind of alterations that they have in their clothing. I don't know. In Britain, school uniforms were much more common, and people might rebel by wearing red socks underneath their real school uniform socks, and then just showing the socks sometimes underneath. So people find ways of rebelling, but they will certainly find rebelling ways over shoes, even when shoes are specified. So people can connect. You can find a friend because you can justify, you can explain their taste, you can identify their taste, you can connect through those objects and find friends. Using an object to find love. In 1973, I'll read this one. An American student, Bill Bryson, was traveling around Europe and decided to take a temporary job at the Virginia Water Mental Hospital outside London in England. So this is his description of how he met his future wife. One day, I was dispatched to a neighboring ward called Florence Nightingale to borrow a bottle of Thorazine to keep the patients docile. Flow, as it was called, that's Florence Nightingale, was a strange and gloomy place full of much more seriously demented people who wandered about or rocked ceaselessly in high-backed chairs. This is the place in which they're meeting when they find it. At the far end of the room, there moved a pretty young nurse of clear and radiant goodness, caring for these helpless wrecks with boundless reserves of energy and compassion, guiding them to a chair, brightening their day with chatter, wiping dribble from their chins. And I thought, this is just the sort of person I need. And we were married 16 months later at a local church.
The description of what the person needs based on someone wiping dribble from their chins.
Yeah, I mean, he's an American, and but the truth is he and his wife Cynthia have been married ever since, and they've 4 children. They've lived in Yorkshire, England, and Hanover, New Hampshire, and other places. So he's a famous writer. I mean, he wrote it that way, but clearly this was not, it's well known that men are more romantic than women and fall in love much more quickly, and I don't say that to be controversial, but it seems to be evidence is that women think things through a little more carefully. It may be also a very generational courtship. This was a baby boomer thing where people traveled over distances and met people quickly and jumped into relationships and tried to figure out if they would work well afterwards. But it was certainly about objects, about herself, about seeing herself in the room. The room was not romantic. This was not a romantic place to meet. In some sense, it was anti that. But the objects themselves revealed the attractiveness of Cynthia by the syntam, if you like, the whole context of which she was behaving. Defining generations. Next thing I'm going to say is that these add up. These generations add up in a way which has defined different groups of people. So this comes from the Pew Research Letter, but the what it says here, for example, the most recent, the millennials, currently, this is in 2014, last year, will be ages 18 to 33, and this is the age in which they were born in that age group. But what's interesting about them is Gen Xers, born after the baby boomers, boomers down here, people who are born from 46 to 64. That's what it's saying. And silent generation, the generation before that, and then Depression era people born back into the 20s of the people. So the fact that these generations in the United States have names indicates their distinctive characteristics. Right, that these have added up so that we know what the qualities of these people. Boomers were, people who voted for Eisenhower and were very quiet and didn't make a lot of political trouble. And I'm sorry, the silent generation were the Eisenhower people who didn't cause trouble and were very quiet. And the baby boomers were famous for being rebellious and anti-war and joining social movements. And the characteristics and qualities of these generations are being researched now as people follow them years and years later. Right? We're still tracing that same cohorts of people as they pass through different phases of life, which seems to me that it's generally understood, even though it's not theorized as to why it should be existing, that it is a well-known fact of market researchers and political opinion pollsters and people like that to understand the generations have different characteristics. So generations are different in their celebrities and in their music. So just real quickly, these aren't totally clear things, but my mother-in-law was definitely from Depression-era people, and she and her husband, my father-in-law, were huge Frank Sinatra fans. So they grew up in Brooklyn, New York, and for them, Frank Sinatra, the hoodlum from Hoboken, was absolutely fabulous, and no music was ever better than theirs, and that's what they wanted, Whereas millennials, we move up to and there's not just one group of stars and one style of music, but we actually don't know, I think, what the millennials actually will be decided later on is the characteristic of their generation. It's still in formation, it's still in flux, and sometimes it's only in retrospect that it becomes clearer. For baby boomers like I was, the Beatles were by no means the only group. There were loads and loads of people, the Rolling Stones and loads of others, and Kinks, and only years later does it suddenly realize, yeah, the Beatles were tremendously important. Maybe they were the defining group of the generation. Right now, I don't know. Taylor Swift is popular, but nobody could really say that everyone likes Taylor Swift, which isn't true. And then what's the music? Maybe people have only described it as uplifting music. We're not quite sure what it is, but at the moment, people seem to be having lots of uplifting songs that are inspiring and those kind of things. That will emerge over time as to what the celebrity and their defining music is. So features of one generation. Let's take in hipsters for a moment. Skinny jeans, frozen yogurt, cupcakes, repurposed furniture, decorations, all those kind of things. And then location in newly popular neighborhoods. So Brooklyn, New York, Mission District, San Francisco, the Angel area, London. Every major city that does a modern thing has a version of hipsters and its own neighborhoods that have been colonized and changed over to express the features of different generations. So they're restyling, repurposing the future society. So let's summarize what we've seen objects being used for. We've seen objects help people. Using objects helps individuals over the lifetime. Using objects also helps aggregate people into whole generations. Object-using generations put their stamp on society. Because they're different and because they have this impact in neighborhoods and all this way, they're having effects on society. What we've seen is sociological. So I'm going to say Santa really can only be explained sociologically. It's really not something economic or something political, institutional. Same goes for those shoes, with their girls meeting the style of their shoes. You have to pay for some of these things, but basically they're choices of interpretation. Music, which you choose, the neighborhoods, which you choose. Again, I think those can only be defined sociologically, not just by economics. People Sometimes they're willing to pay more in a more fashionable neighborhood, and sometimes they're going into poorer neighborhoods because they can afford less, but they then transform those neighborhoods. So there are many cities that want to attract hipsters. If you hear interviews with city mayors from all over the less successful cities in the United States, they're wanting to attract hipsters, they want to attract younger people in to improve the cities, to improve the quality of life, and to create development. So new generations with their own culture, their own priorities, and their own aesthetic. They seem to have a view of the what's good and what's bad. The perception of it seems to be, I would call it essentially aesthetic. So the work of the theorist. So the job of the sociological theorist is to bring together the trio of components we have seen. That is the people, what they like in each generation, the objects which they're using, what kinds of popular culture, which ones have they chosen, and how it all comes together as society. This process of bringing together the pieces of sociology is called conceptualization. How much of modern life how much of the modern life we see is sociological? Okay, seeing things sociologically means starting with the objects. So objects link people dynamically in changing ways. This is not fixed like law or institutional mission. Objects attract people freely. That is, it's not limited by a lack of money or economic inequality. And finally, objects connect people socially. Objects show us society and not just what's happening in the various regions of a person's own brain. And that's sort of pushing back against what I thought were the unsustainable, incompetent theories of other ways of looking at life and society. Society in each generation has a winning shape. So there's only one configuration of American society in each generation. This is the world each generation creates. It's the mainstream of what exists in each decade. People in each generation are prepared to fit into their world. They do things differently from older generations. Next, people understand how their own generation wants to do things. So they have an understanding through the aesthetic and through the objects of their own generation. And people in society are matched up. New generations of people fit into a changed society. So because society has changed and the people have changed, they come together in that process of change in the next iteration, the next configuration of the way American society appears. All right, so let's move on to some conclusions. The trifecta. A winning model is a sociological model. The work of social theorists is to discover how the pieces of sociology come together in their own generation. So how do people, using their new objects, create society of their generation? People, objects, and society all fit together. The details of how this happens is the challenge to be discovered. The task of theorizing how each generation got those pieces together and how they fit them all together, that seems to me the challenge of explaining the trifecta, the three pieces of it: people, objects, society. Work of the sociologist is never done. It's an exciting time to be a sociological theorist because a new picture of society emerges in each generation. What is new? What's different about the next generation of people's objects? It is easy for older generations to notice only what is different and to complain that it's not as good as the past. The theorist's conceptual challenge is identifying what are the new features and capabilities of new ways of connecting. So I'm saying that this work is always ongoing because we're theoretically trying to catch up all the time with where each next generation is taking us. What success in society means. At any one time, there exists one American society. This I'm moving on is a little more controversial, but I'm trying to push the envelope of what we can explain. Personal success in life means coordinating with our society in the present moment, the decade of its settling generation. That is, I think each decade has a generation that is settling down, getting its own job, starting its own career, making its own choices of lifestyle. And that's the one that puts its stamp on society. Personal success involves finding out how our generation has configured society and synchronizing with them. So the opportunities that are going to present us in personal success will be understanding what our society is creating as it's newly creating it and getting in sync with that. And helping other people involves getting them to the standards and expectations of changing generations. That is, we can't train or help people into a fixed model of what American life is. We're going to need to get people to understand what the standards and expectations are as they change with each generational iteration of society. Okay, so that must be my overall view of what's going on here. Yeah.
Do you think religion has anything to do with society and how people connect with each other, or how it affects like the childhood stage or the middle years or the parenting stage?
As a sociologist, my short answer is going to be no. And the short answer is because it's a culture, because it's something that's fixed and is the same from parent to child, that it's not going to be compatible with building their own new world in each generation.
What about people like myself whose parents come from a different country, but like for me personally, I don't believe in their religion and I don't believe in their practice.
Yeah.
I do my own individual thing and I try to fit into society the way my generation does, regardless of what they believe in. Do you think that's related somehow?
Do I think, I mean, that seems to me that you're saying that you're rejecting tradition and rejecting the religion that was handed to you, and you're doing something that's more modern and more American.
Well, it's not that it's a rejection, it's just that it's not, some people don't practice it, some do, and it affects how maybe your children will behave in society and connect, versus those who are strict about stuff like that. Like strict about religion versus not strict about it and how it impacts society.
Yeah, I think if you are strict about religion, that would be incompatible with the kind of sociological processes we've talked about today. Any other thoughts or questions? Yeah.
You've emphasized harmony in terms of the kind of things that objects do.
Yes.
And you've also emphasized in your last remarks that there's only one kind of society and there are singular things for each generation. And so in both of those ways, you really avoided talking about conflict. And I'm wondering what role these objects play in deepening conflict, first of all. And secondly, whether there aren't tremendous conflicts, even within the same generations, that are conflicts that are marked by social objects. So, for example, when you look through the New York Times Magazine, you see lots of social objects that are designed to say that this is something only a few people can afford. $3,000 wristwatches, multi-million-dollar homes. Isn't conflict also something that is expressed through these social objects?
All right, in a short talk, there are going to be, obviously, things which I have not had time to discuss. So one of the things which I'll answer that indirectly, which is one of the things that I have not had time to discuss is the amount of variation that there is within each of these generations. So that there are, that's why I say, I'd argue, using this sociological model, you can see that they're going to create spectrums or variations of difference within it. And one of the biggest sources that I would say that is a source of not success, or in various ways, is people who are out of synchronization with their generation. So for various reasons, if you have been passed on in a culture that is segregated or isolated from other people, and you're bumping up at different times against people who are living a different way, there will certainly be plenty of scope for misunderstanding and possibly outright conflict. But yes, more of that would have to be explained in terms of... I've tried to focus on what is central to this sociological model, and then before we generalize it into how what problems it would face with other groups of people. Yeah, and certainly an important area, yeah.
Because I'm just thinking, even in terms of music, there's protest music, there's ways of rejecting dominant music. There are genres of music that seem to even reject what is popular among people in their own generation as markers, for example, as ways of marking. So it'd be interesting. I'll have to talk with you further.
Yeah. Orlando Patterson, the Harvard sociologist, talks quite a lot about, for example, black music in the United States, and he would say that's actually very mainstream if you consider how widely consumed it is and how famous they are. So there's what appear to be markers of conflict of different things going on in the society. Bonus slide. I'll put this one in real quickly here.
All right.
An afterthought on generational consensus, and maybe we had something to discuss, but we've had a discussion anyway. Generations seem to be clearer about the objects they dislike than those they admire. So I'm going to say, because in a class recently I did, in April 2015, Suffolk students poll said that the celebrities they most dislike are Kanye West and Kim Kardashian. All right, so this is a student group of people. So what I'm saying, there's an overwhelming agreement on this, and not on any such, and no, not any such consensus about which stars are liked. So it does seem that we seem to identify what we dislike more than what we adored. And these two particular people, because they're married at the moment and also sort of work as a unit, has attracted a lot of attention that I would say is very polarizing between different groups of people, and that in itself is quite an interesting topic. That's about why that happens.
Any sense as to why students have had it with these two?
I personally think it's because Kim Kardashian is nothing but a sex symbol, and she's famous for no reason whatsoever, and she doesn't do anything for society, and she's not a role model of any sort, but people still look up to her. She's done nothing at all. Okay. And it's like, what's the point of making her famous for doing absolutely nothing? Like, what's so good about this person? And it just keeps building, and people still adore her. It's not positive in any sort of way.
She's a very polarizing person in the sense that she has diehard fans, and then she has another equally strong group of people who explain all those points that you've made. Yes. So within each generation, there are limits to what the consensus is about certain things, and certain people fix themselves almost at that focal point, which I think is really interesting.
Kanye is like, he has good work in music, but because he's associated with Kim Kardashian, there's now one. So everyone's like, enough. It was just enough of Kim and the Kardashians. Now it's because she's the most popular one of the family. Now it's her and her husband have been attacked. Enough of you too. So he is talented. Now that he's this way, it's not as many fans, I guess. I would say.
How do they draw the line of generations?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, I think they draw themselves by the people whom they're elective choices because they have a different lifestyle, because they have different musical tastes, because they have a different perspective on the world. You know, it's the generations that tell the researchers where they are. In practical matters, there has to be a blur between the people who are right at the edge of those things. So I'm interested in that. And I've talked to people who seem to be right on the cusp of one other generations. And they usually break out into one of the two. So just incidentally, one of my sons claims that he's in the older group, that he's definitely not a millennial, he's a Gen Xer, but he might be at the same age as somebody older who does think they're a millennial, you know. So at the breaking point, you know, but there's obviously no law or somebody with a knife or a roadblock who's dividing generations.
Right.
Yeah. But that in itself is interesting as to why they break where they do, because there seems to be about 2 popular culture generations for every biological generation, which is about 30 years from parent to child. There's always another generation in between. It doesn't go the cultural generations go faster than the biological generations, so there's something else going on there, which is also really interesting. Okay, well, well, thank you all for attending, and again, this is sponsored by the Sociology Department.